If agencies are from Mars, where are clients from? Don't answer that. Instead, listen to Leesa Eichberger, today's guest on the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Leesa has been leading marketing at large brands for a while now, including stints as a CMO at Jenny Craig and head of brand for Farmers Insurance. Full disclosure, we also worked together while I was at Chiat years ago, and she ran marketing for Vonage. If you're old enough, you may have their goofy theme song earworming its way into your brain right now. You're welcome. Leesa knows firsthand what it's like to be the client, and it was a lot of fun getting her POV from the other side of the solar system. We talked about the role of a CMO today and how it's evolving and occasionally disappearing. We discussed the importance of trust and transparency in agency-client relationships and how a little skin in the game for agencies could help improve this dynamic. And we explored the reality that sometimes work does suck, and that's okay. In fact, that's often where the magic happens, if we're able to work through those hard challenges. Speaking of hard challenges, Leesa is also an avid triathlete, which has me feeling slightly guilty for complaining about my long walk to get the mail earlier. Slightly. The point is, Leesa's awesome, and here she is. All right, Leesa Eichberger, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thanks for having me, TJ. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. I'm excited to dive into good stuff. I think you're one of the first people, if not the first, kind of client-side executive level people that I'm talking to on this show. So I'm excited to get that perspective into the mix here and see where we go with that.
Cool. Well, hopefully I can help add some thinking.
I think you will. We'll start by giving the people just a chance to kind of get to know you and a little bit about your story. So why don't you just tell us what you do for work and maybe a little bit about how you came to be doing it?
Sure. So, my background has been marketing kind of all along the way. And I had someone who recently called it a mosaic background, which is a term I love. I've been working kind of as a senior marketer for the last too many years, maybe to count, across a variety of categories. So, most recently I was at RingCentral, which is a software company, not a doorbell company. Prior to that, I was overseeing brand for Farmers Insurance. Before that, I was CMO at Jenny Craig. You and I met when I was overseeing marketing for Vonage, which at the time was B2C, now it's B2B. But my background before that was in agency world. So I think, you and I have had those conversations before. So I got, a little bit of both sides of the fence as far as working on, brands from both sides. But my passion is marketing, just good marketing, period. And, right now I'm doing, I'm consulting and looking for my next kind of permanent role while I'm focused on some fractional work and helping a handful of just really cool brands do fun things, cool. In the interim.
That's awesome. I mean, I think it'll be fun to explore the fact that you have both sides of the experience will be fun because I think there's a little bit of that, agencies are from Mars and clients are from Venus vibe that happens sometimes. And so that the fact that you have a little bit of the crossover understanding, I think might help open some eyes for those of us who spent most of our lives on the agency side. And I also think for people who live on the client side, pretty much their whole careers, I think we can open some eyes there as well. So it'll be fun to dig into that. Before we go too deep into that, I always like to ask people, what role does work play in your life?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it is something I've been giving a ton of thought to lately, especially as I am in kind of a transitional phase. Yeah. I'm someone who I'm passionate about my work. And I have a hard time doing anything kind of half-heartedly. I had a joke with an old boss that I have an on and off toggle switch and not much in between. Yeah. So once I start something, I'm like, man. Yeah. And then I fall asleep. That's there's not a I kind of phase out of it. I work, and then I'm done. And as I'm looking at kind of this next kind of phase in my life, I want to make sure that work is playing the right role in that. I mean, obviously. I love what I do, but I'm not living to work, or I shouldn't be. So it's finding that right balance. And I've always felt like anything worth doing is worth doing well and not doing half-heartedly. But also remembering, that we're human, and it's not just about the job. It's about kind of what else is going on in your life and what the job can help you get to. So yeah, it's been maybe all encompassing at certain points in my life, and I would like it to maybe not be everything and just be one facet of a well-rounded life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks have been exploring this question a bit. Probably sort of COVID sort of smacked people in the face with this question, and that led to some of the quiet quitting and just the great resignation and purpose becoming much more high on people's thing. And I think one of the things you brought up that's interesting is, depending on where we are in life, work can play a different role, and that's okay. Like if we decide sort of early on in our careers that we kind of want to go all in and that's who we want to be in that moment, it's not necessarily a bad thing as long as we're choosing it and we're sort of not getting sort of swept up in it for the wrong reason. So I think there's a lot of value in just doing what you're doing. Like just think about it, let yourself explore, let yourself see like where do I want this to sit in my life? And it's okay if it provides a good chunk of meaning for you, but if you're like, I also want to make sure I'm getting meaning in the other areas of my life. How can I set work up to allow for that? That's the hard thing. I think, you described that personality type, which I think is common for a lot of us, which is I'm not going to do it kind of half in. I can't.
Right. So, but, I mean, I even struggle like my leisure, quote unquote, activities are, I'm a triathlete, and I'm like an open water swimmer. Like I don't have much of a like chill, like hang out. So, I am pretty much at peace with the fact that working hard is something that does bring me a lot of satisfaction. And if I'm in a role I'm enjoying and working with people I like, it brings me a lot of joy. And I think that's great. But I do sometimes step back and go, gosh, some of these people maybe haven't really figured out where they work like the absolute minimum, and then they like go sit on an island or, I don't know if I could be happy doing that either.
It doesn't sound like it. I think if you were on that island, you would be running races and climbing things.
Trying to figure out how to organize the island better.
Like and it's okay. Like knowing who we are, I think is part of that process, like who we are, and then where does work sit with that so that we can continue to express who we are in that space of our lives, Well, I think it'll be interesting to see where that question nets out for you here as you continue to ponder it. Another question I like to ask, and this is maybe going to go a little bit back for you. I don't know where this will sit, but this is called the DesuckifyWork Podcast. So I'm curious, what's your personal suckiest work story?
Oh boy. I mean, I've been working a while. I've got a lot. I think, anytime you've had to lay someone off or been in a situation where you're kind of hurting someone else, those are the suckiest. I'm going to put that to the side, because I think one of the things that I found as I've looked at what I want in my career and what I don't want in my career, the times when things for me have really sucked is when I'm working with people or a person who isn't necessarily honest or straightforward. And one of the things I kind of pride myself on is I'm transparent and I'm direct, maybe to a fault. I'm honest. People tend to know, kind of where they stand with me, if they're doing good work or not doing good work. And, I appreciate that style of working. And I've had situations, and I can think of one very, a very particular one where, somebody I was working for basically asked me to lie to their boss about something big. And I was put in the most awful situation because, first off, just not in my nature to like tap dance, and I had to go to someone and say, okay, how do I solve this? And that for me was one of the just suckiest situations of I don't want to throw my boss under the bus. I don't want to lie to this person's boss. And I want to be forthcoming with the situation. So I was lucky in some ways that I had information that was the right information that I could share and kind of work around the scenario. But it also it made me take a step back, and it's like, okay, what was my boss at the time? What was he trying to protect, and why was he putting me in that situation? And I think thinking about people's motivations can help desuckify,
Yeah.
the situation. Because it's like, okay, I take the step back and go, okay, he has a new boss. His boss asked him for something he should have done and didn't. And he was like protecting himself.
Sure.
And, he ended up not staying, forever with that role. And, that helped me feel better about it.
Yeah.
But, I've had times when I've looked at like, what do I want in my next job? What can I not have in my next job? And honesty seems like it should be a logical one to not even actually have to put on your list. But you cannot have list includes working with liars, right?
Yes.
And that actually came from years back, not even one of these current, more current situations. I think, the sucky stuff is when people aren't forthcoming or honest or straightforward.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, on the one hand, feels like that should be kind of like table stakes, but humans are humans.
Right.
And when we don't always show up in our best way at work because whatever those incentives behind the scenes are can push us to violate values we might even think we hold, right? That person might believe like, I believe in being trustworthy and transparent, but then when kind of pushed up against the wall with that situation was like, I think I need to do an end around. And that's a really tough thing to be next to and near. And it's also something to be just maybe aware of in our own selves. Like, when have we maybe not stood up to our own values? Not necessarily truthfulness, which that's obviously one a lot of us might hold, but we all have our sort of stated values, the things we want to live up to. And what do we notice that sort of knocks us off that path sometimes? And I loved how you kind of took the perspective of that person, like what are they dealing with so that they got put into this pathway, not to excuse the behavior, but to maybe understand it better and maybe relate to it more from a human to human perspective, and then go knowing that I'm still doing what I think is right, but I'm not viewing it through the same lens anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've done a DISC, the dominant, inclusive.
Recently certified in that one, actually.
Oh, okay. Yes. I love it in part because when you do it with a team, you can recognize people's, what drives them.
Yeah.
But you can also recognize that how they act under stress is the bad side often of their personality type. And it's like, okay, this is a stressful situation. I can expect whomever, TJ, to react this way and, under stress. And what I'm seeing is a stress reaction, not a jerk.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that.
And it's great to be at companies that invest in training and, helping people to work together as teams. And, not every company does it, but I think, some of the good ones do. Yeah. And I think it's good if people do it on their own if the company doesn't.
Totally agree with that. And I will say this from my experience, agencies generally underinvest in that kind of stuff. My experience has been that the corporate clients tend to have a little more of that structure to it, where agencies, certainly on the creative side, it's kind of like a little bit of a free for all. And it's like, in a way, I think people may view it like you're sort of herding cats or something. It's like, there're just so many disparate personality types that make the creative thing flow. You almost don't want to mess with it by trying to get people to think about how they're operating. But I love that point about the idea that how we operate under stress and how that can show up. I was trying to think of my own results, and I think I'm like a moderate D. I think you're probably a higher D than I am, I guess. But
Gee,
my D goes down under stress, where some people's go up. They try to dominate the situation more. What I've found is, for me, I get much more into a for lack of a better term, politician mode. Like, can't we all get along kind of a mode when the stress comes, as opposed to naturally, I want to just kind of try to get things done, which I haven't done too much deep diving to understand why that is, but it's great to have that awareness, because then you can see it in yourself or someone else, and then, not judge in the same way.
And try and rein it in. I know under stress, I get very focused on just the results, and I kind of I worry less about the how, and I'm more about just getting it done. Yeah. And it's something I've worked very hard in my career to be kind of a kinder, gentler human, because my focus can be very results oriented. Yeah. And I've never once intentionally, I think, tried to railroad or just get run people over to get things done, but I think sometimes it can be perceived that way. And that's, when I get the feedback, we all say feedback is a gift. It still hurts to get feedback like that, but it's like, oh man, like that was never my intention. I had no idea, and after you absorb and say, okay, that hurt, I get it, being able to look back at that and go, okay, I need to learn from that. Like, I need to not do that again, or do that less. Good inputs.
What's interesting too is like, for me as somebody with a moderate D, I might notice that behavior in you more than somebody else who has a high D or somebody who's a really low D. So like knowing that how your team kind of stacks up can also help you calibrate. If you got a bunch of high Ds on your team, they might never give you that feedback. They might all be like,
they might never notice it.
They wouldn't notice it. Like that's just how you do it.
But
that's
the
work.
eyes though, that like need that, the cheering on and the social side, their feelings get hurt. And again, like the last thing in the world I've ever wanted to do is hurt someone's feelings. And I often, I sometimes don't realize I have. So unless someone says, hey, that wasn't great. It's like, oh man, thank you for telling me.
That's the tricky part because I'm a high I. The hard part there is, yes, the feelings do get hurt. And then occasionally you have a little bit of confrontation avoidance because you want everyone to kind of socially get along and relate. So you may be afraid to go, what you just said kind of stung. So it's like, how do you create that environment? And this is what I love about assessments like this, where you then give permission for the conversation to happen. So it's not just sort of like random out of the blue. It's like, well, this is now the water we swim in. And the water we swim in is that when you feel something that didn't strike you right, say it. And we understand where each other's coming from and we can find a common ground knowing that you're more of a high I, I'm more of a high D. How do we each find a way to connect to that in each other so that it works better for us? Yeah. It's another thing I like to ask, and we're kind of digging into like our own personal experiences here, but been a lot of talk about the state of work over the last few years, partially because of COVID and all that stuff. But I think in general, with technology and everything, you see the numbers on low engagement and all this other stuff. What's your take based on what you've seen on the state of work out there? And if we want to put it on a suck meter from it's fine to hair on fire, where does it fall?
Yeah, I feel like we're in a little bit of an inflection point. And part of that is Gen Z and, in particular coming up. I mean, these poor, I call them kids and some of them aren't kids anymore, but they lost their proms and their senior years and they lost years of college. And they have back to what we're saying, kind of that reevaluation of what matters. Work has taken on a much different tone than it did, I think, for some of us who are Gen X, elder millennials, which makes you feel like a really old person. We had maybe a slightly different perspective. And then you see, to call it what you may, with kind of capitalism and stock prices and how companies are driven to not just be successful. Like, it's not okay to just run a profitable business. You have to show growth quarter over quarter over quarter. And that has led to, I think, corporate behaviors that aren't employee friendly. Massive layoffs. We've seen it for the last year and change. And regardless of what the jobs reports say, if you work in marketing, you've seen a lot of layoffs. It's it's maybe worse than other industries. So I think you put those two things together, and you've got this group of kids. They're not kids, but young employees entering the workforce who have seen things starting to break. They think companies don't care about them, and they may be very well right. And then you're putting them next to a boomer, Gen X, millennial who has a kind of a different perspective. And we're at an inflection point of what matters and like where does work sit in the importance. And we talk about quiet quitting. We talk about you hear the conversations about the soft life. And there are still tons of people I think coming out that are huge, hardworking, driven. They want the big jobs. They want to make tons of money. They want to be successful. But I think there's less, less pride in that than there once was. Which it just makes for an interesting dynamic and a shift in management styles and a shift in how we think about engaging employees and what matters to them.
I think you're right, and I think it's a healthy space. I think we need this space. And I give credit to Gen Z for sort of standing up for themselves. I think, sometimes us older folks might complain about it a little bit, like, oh man, like younger people are more demanding. Sometimes it feels like, but it's actually like, I'm glad they are, because I think there's no reason to just sit back and accept. Now, there may be realities that you ultimately have to deal with, and learn how you fit into those realities. But it's okay to be like, that's screwed up. Quarterly numbers thing you keep doing, and then you lay off, 10% of your staff every time you don't meet the expectation of the market. Right. Like, that sucks. Like, it's okay to say that it sucks. I don't know that anybody has a great answer, because we would have arrived at it already. But I think what this conversation is doing is at least putting it on the radar. Companies are at least becoming aware of that impact on the human side. And I think starting to maybe see some data on how that the impact goes beyond simply hurting people's feelings, and that it actually can affect some bottom line things if you constantly just crush people.
Right.
And so what is the right relationship between companies and employees that allows for some blend of, come here, show up, work hard, do all the things that you need to do, but we are going to try to provide an environment that works for you. And then what are the support mechanisms that need to be put in place, and who puts them in place? I mean, these are now political discussions too. And I don't even want to go there as much as say that I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it's important.
It'll be interesting to see, if businesses continue to be so like growth driven. We certainly made a shift from, revenues to growth to revenue. What comes next? I don't know. But it would be nice to say, hey, I've got a nice profitable business that just like chugs along and makes the same amount of money every quarter. And isn't this lovely? As opposed to being kind of driven to grow.
That's an interesting thought, and I wonder if, depending on where you are in your life cycle of business, do the expectations need to change in a way that maybe we're not currently allowing for with market expectations? I mean, I don't pretend to have those answers, but I like that we're digging into it. And, I want to come back a little bit to the spaces that we've sat in, the marketing and advertising world in those businesses. You talked about, revenue and growth. And so I'm actually kind of curious a little bit about the role of CMO specifically. And, you see some companies smashing that together with other roles, and the chief revenue officer, the chief growth officer, there's the chief experience officer. There's all these roles that are connected to the idea of marketing and growing the business. And then I know you've obviously had roles leading brand, and there's that piece of it. If we look at the CMO role specifically, where do you think it sits today? What is its role, and is it being defined in the right way?
I think we're in an interesting spot. Marketing maybe has a marketing problem. I think every CEO has a different vision of what marketing is supposed to do. And because of that, every CMO role, or if there even is a CMO role, a lot of companies have moved away from that, has different expectations of what your job is. And, creating some kind of clear boundaries of what's marketing and what's not, would be a nice thing to do. But right now it becomes a little bit of, you're in charge of everything and nothing. And the expectation is that marketing will, it never seems to drive the business from the rest of the company's perspective. But if it's not working, it's marketing's fault. If it is working, it's sales, or it's the product, or it's whatnot. So it's a little bit of a mush. And I think clearly defining what the expectations are, and setting, goals that you share with a leadership team. Here are the things that I will focus on. Here are the metrics that I am going to measure that against. And here is what expect that to do to our financials, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. I think that's really important, because otherwise you do end up with you can't be a jack of all trades and expect, to knock it out of the park with everything.
I think some companies, it just feels like marketing is like some weird voodoo to them. Like they just don't like they don't understand how it works, and they hate the fact that it doesn't show up exactly the way, finances show up. It's not so black and white in every area. The metrics for marketing can be kind of wishy-washy feeling at times, brand awareness and salience, and like these terms that like, yeah, they mean something, but it's not like, wow, we just brought in, X amount of revenue a month and our costs stayed the same. So that's good. I know that.
Right.
So it's harder, particularly for non-marketing minds, which is often the case at the top of a company, although not always, to grasp that. How do you, when you're in those roles, is there anything you do to try to help people really get the value of what you're doing?
I think there's two sides to it, right? There's the establishing data and metrics that can help prove your case.
Yeah.
There are certain things, like you just said, the value of a brand. You can put a number on it. I use this example, and I don't want to denigrate any car in particular, but someone doesn't drive a BMW because they just needed something to get them from point A to point B. Right. If that's what they needed, they would drive a Honda. I don't know, whatever. They would drive just something with round wheels and an engine that mostly runs.
Yes.
That you're choosing some of these things because you believe in the brand. You eat a certain brand of cornflakes. If you eat cornflakes.
Yeah.
I don't actually eat cornflakes, but you're going to pick the Special K versus the the bargain brand, and there's probably reasons behind that beyond just the brand, like the flavor or whatnot. But you trust certain brands, and that's the stuff that like you can't necessarily put like hard and fast numbers. You can, however, I think, set up things for looking at aided awareness. You can look at things for familiarity, consideration, unaided awareness. If you launch some sort of campaign, keeping track of both consumer sentiment about the brand from the start, to the finish. You can then look at unique visitors to the website. You can look at how much search volume increased. And it's not maybe as crisp as some of the, click-through rates on a digital ad. But, even clicking through on a digital ad, you don't click through on, most of the time you click through it on something because you accidentally hit your mouse in the wrong spot.
And my stupid fat thumbs are half the reason.
Right. It's, but if you don't know a brand and you just get served something, even if it's in the right category, you often aren't going to check it out. It really comes back to, you have to have awareness, and that it can be hard. So there's the storytelling side of it. There's the, understanding, that brands matter. And the value of a brand is huge. And then, there's the taking the data side of it, and, also proving as much as you are able to prove. And, ideally the numbers work over the long haul. And there certainly are plenty of, multivariate testing you can do. There's and actually what I'm looking for is the multiple attribution, what caused it. It's not just last touch attribution that shows you the numbers. Like, I'm saying that all jumbled up. My apologies.
I did.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it is. It's it is one of the hardest parts. Was it Wanamaker who said, 50% of my advertising dollars are wasted? I just don't know which
ones. Yeah.
And there's still, I think, some truth to that. But I also think companies are starting to recognize the value of brand, and you're seeing longer form content come around in a new way. TV ads have maybe died off a bit from their past, center of the universe. But you are seeing longer form content. You're seeing people willing to engage in quality storytelling, and none of us want to be sold to. We want something that makes us feel good, and that's when at the end of the day, a brand is something that gives you some sort of emotional, whether it's security or laughter or something. You want to have that some sort of reaction as a result of a brand.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we all know it. Like we all feel it. Like somebody tells you like, why did you buy Apple? Why did you buy Nike? Like you all know you didn't just buy Nike because you think the quality of the rubber on their soles is better than the quality of the rubber on some other, ASICS soles. Like that's not how it works. Like we're almost uncomfortable with the fact that like there's this emotional side of us that has a lot of malleability.
Right.
And it's almost like, to own up to that is a little scary. Like the world's a lot crisper, like you said, like when everything's black and white and it's all about my intellectual prowess, understanding how to move the right levers versus the squishiness and the uncertainty of, can I make somebody feel better about my brand so that tomorrow they're going to pay $10 more for whatever that thing is.
Right.
It's hard. It's harder to sit with. And so,
or even not pay $10 more, just choose you in a flat running. If it's a flat field, like, why pick this one versus that one?
Yeah. I mean, and
then especially if you want to add a premium to it.
Exactly. And I think it even then comes back to, I think about, certainly in the agency space, there's a little bit of like consistent self-doubt about the work we do, meaning because it's not like very obviously measurable in the same way as other things. Like you can create something and you can feel amazing about it, but on some level you're afraid of getting the question like, did it work? Because you're like, I don't really know. Like, I know I can have all those numbers you talked about, but at the end of the day, there are so many variables. There are so many touch points that you can attribute to, did I actually go out and buy that BMW because of what you did?
Well, and I think what that comes back to is, we have to remember that marketing and advertising is not 100% of why decisions are made, especially not advertising.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've heard it said, and I feel pretty strongly, like changing an ad agency because things aren't working in business. Like, take that step back. Is there a product problem? Is there a pricing problem? I mean, the worst thing you can possibly do is have advertising that's better than the product, because then you've actually brought someone in, you've spent the money, you've engaged them, they interact with the product, and they go, ew. Now they don't like your product. They're going to tell people they don't like your product, and you've gone. So the marketing could be too good for what you have. Yeah. And I think that's one of the other challenges marketers have is it's that whole kind of mix of things. It's not just ads. And when you talk about ad agencies, they're like the pointy tip of the spear of that part of it, because they can't control. I mean, it's zero control usually over product, price, distribution, all the other things that are critical to the success of a business.
Yeah. And it's interesting because on one level, I think when you work in an agency, part of, at least for me, and this, I think there's different types who show up, but for me, it was always like, the more I could potentially impact, the better. Meaning, like, I wanted to have the conversations with clients where maybe I'm not talking price strategy, but maybe I am, like being a creative problem solving partner for any of the problems that may show up, not simply like, what TV commercial do we run next quarter, or what out of home, or what, what's our social feed going to look like? All of those are fun and important. But I think a lot of people in agencies, like, inevitably those questions come up anyway, because you recognize this thing I'm working at is a lever among many. And so you wonder, can I add other levers? And I think that brings me to the dynamic between agencies and clients. It's really interesting because I think on both sides, you probably have marketers who go, God, I just wish the agency understood my business better. And you have agency people who go, God, I just wish they'd let me in, and yet there's this weird wall. And I think the relationship can often just be sort of adversarial. I'm curious from your experience, because you've sat on both sides, why do you think that is? And is that a bad thing?
Well, I mean, I think in any relationship like that, some tension is probably good. You hire ideally a great ad agency who's going to push back on some things. They're not just going to say yes, yes, yes. And you want them to one of the things I've said for many years now is I want ideas that scare me, because I can always rein it back. But if I'm the one going a little more, that's frustrating.
Yes.
On the flip side, there's the challenge of how much can they impact. And I think the relationships I've had that have been the best with my agencies are when the agency genuinely is treated as part of my team. And they see all the numbers. They're under, full NDA, but they're part of the marketing team. And they, ideally, they potentially have skin in the game. And, that means they can push back on, your pricing sucks. Back to your Desuckify, your pricing sucks. Like, we can't fix that.
Right.
Can you guys work on that? And I want that input from smart people, but it's that bringing them into the fold as much as possible. I think, where it goes really south is when it becomes very transactional. And, it's like, I'm going to pay you this amount of money as a vendor to do this project. And nobody feels good about being a hired gun vendor for a project. But that can be challenging too, because you got to have the trust that goes both ways. And it has to come from the top, I think, of both sides, which can be also hard.
A couple of things you said there that I think could be worth exploring. The first was the skin in the game idea, which is one that I think both sides have probably been like, oh, that would be really interesting, but what does that really look like? So, and I think the reason I think it could be interesting is because you can get to that vendor-like relationship because of the way we tend to charge for the hours. And it's just a simple like billing arrangement. And it's just squeeze. And like, of course you're going to like, inevitably that's going to push both sides to sort of be like, okay, I guess I'm just a vendor, and okay, I guess they're just a vendor. Like, and therefore like you get the behavior you don't want. We all talk up here, but then the pricing structure kind of pushes us to act in ways we don't want. What could skin in the game look like, and how might it then affect the way we work together?
That's 5 full podcasts of conversation, probably. I think from the media side, it's probably easier than from the creative side. Because you can absolutely look at, how much are you saving us on our buy? What are we getting? And you can look at that from a more data focused way. But I think some of it is also just, it's a trust factor. And it's a relationship factor. I have worked in scenarios where the agency doesn't enjoy working with us. And because of that, you get a lower and lower and lower tier of creative engagement and strategic engagement. And it becomes kind of a downward spiral. I've worked in other scenarios where like, we are the client you want to be on. And because of that, you get the best people, you get the best work. And I think that combination, good people doing good work, actually is less hours. Because they're putting in the smarter, better work. And if they're part of the team and they feel engaged, if that becomes a positive flywheel of success. I think you get a doom loop the other direction, where the bad relationship creates worse relationships, creates worse results. So the skin in the game side of it, I think, is back to kind of transparency and openness, and building a relationship from the start of mutual success. You can put obviously financials around it. But we kind of do get back to like, if they have no control over the product itself, the price itself as an agency, like how much skin do they want in the game? So I'm a bigger fan of kind of a fee, and then maybe a kicker if things are good, but not necessarily detractor if things are bad.
I think that probably makes sense. And I think getting super clear on like, what are the levers that we're impacting as the agency? What are the, if a client is open to expanding those levers, then that can become part of that discussion. But at the very least, knowing like, when we have a successful campaign, we believe it impacts these 3 key metrics, and those are the ones we care about. And if we reach here, there's some kicker. And I think that all comes back to what you said, that this being a relationship. And I think that inherently does not always show up, meaning you step into an ad agency, you're working with a client, part of it's just how fast we're moving. It's just like, you just step into the machine, and it's just suddenly like, yes, I have a relationship with a couple of people, but it can be very transactional. It's like, what are we doing this week? When is that thing showing up? And what's the next big thing, that we're working on that we can get excited about? I feel like there's not a lot of investment in most cases. I'm sure there's exceptions in my experience, to really finding ways to fortify that relationship just purely from a relationship level, rather than just hoping that it works out through the transactional stuff. As you said, like when it's the hot client, it's going to kind of work out a little better, but most clients fall somewhere in between. And how do you build that? I mean, I know I talked to you about this idea that I was wondering about, helping clients and agencies work better together as a coach. And I haven't dug into that too much, but I think whether it's a coaching thing or just a part of the onboarding,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever had an experience where there was some effort put in from both sides to really develop and nurture the relationship outside of the simple transactional stuff that naturally happens?
Yeah. I can't say that it was like we did X and that gave us
Mm-hmm.
Y result on that relationship, because that's transactional again,
Yeah.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the confidence that we believe in each other and kind of have committed to. It's like any relationship. It's
Mm-hmm.
there's give and take. There are going to
Yeah.
be points where things aren't great, and there are going to be
Mm-hmm.
times when the relationship's fantastic.
Yep.
One of the better relationships I've had, I had a quarterly dinner with the head guy at the shop,
Mm-hmm.
or gal, the head
Yep.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation was not, what do you think of this ad? It was, what's working, what's not working? How are
Mm-hmm.
we being a good agency? How are we being a good client? How are we being a bad agency? How are we being a
Mm-hmm.
bad client?
Yeah.
And I think that transparent conversation really did help to maintain the
Mm-hmm.
longevity and the trust
Yeah.
um, between the two organizations. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, coming really kind of from the top too. So
Yeah.
if you're getting along at that senior level, it does filter down.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's back to having hard conversations,
Yeah.
which like you said, not everybody wants to have something
Mm-hmm.
confrontational, and you can do it in a
Yeah.
way that I think is not confrontational.
Right.
But it can be hard to hear the negatives and
Mm-hmm.
hear them,
Yeah.
not defend against them.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us have a tendency like, well, but we had
Right.
this pressure on us, or whatever it might be,
Exactly.
instead of just like saying, okay, let me hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't agree with you, but I'll hear you and
Mm-hmm.
I'll absorb that and think about it.
Yeah. I mean,
And I still might come back and tell you you're wrong, but
yeah, but yeah, I've always said this, even just to clients or for friends, like the breath of allowing something to sink in and taking a breath before you respond to it, that allows you to hear something, to just let it sit with you for even a minute. And then you can start to go, okay, I heard all of these things. Here's what I saw. Here's something I wonder about that might be different.
I love that. I love that phrase. I wonder, not,
not accusatory, not I disagree with, not I hate, not I don't believe. It's not defensive. Yeah, I think curiosity becomes like your best tool in those situations. Really curious. I'm hearing this stuff. I do wonder what is inspiring this conversation, and I hope that they hear me the same way when I say, here's what I've been experiencing. I think some of those assessments we talked about earlier could be really useful too, because if you're talking to somebody with a different personality type, how you can deliver that information might look different, right?
Yes.
A couple of
and I think, we're talking about creatives, right? I mean, in some agencies, they're treated with such kid gloves that it's like they don't understand business or something.
Yeah.
And, creatives aren't like dumb.
We're not like some weird mutants,
Right.
I think it's a really strange thing. I think I don't even know where it came from, so I'm not going to try to guess, but I always hated that, because it's like, I want to be in all the conversations and I want to hear all the things. And yeah, I can be sensitive. Like, I don't like hearing, I didn't like that ad, or that ad didn't do like we thought it would do. Of course, I don't like hearing that, but I would rather hear it than keep doing work for a client who's sitting there every time going, God, they don't get it. I want to have my best chance at getting it. And the only way is by being able to hear what you're telling me. But yeah, that kind of odd babying of creatives. I think, there are some creatives who not that they wouldn't understand, but they got into creative work because they just want to be creative and not think about business, so to speak. And I actually think having a few of those on your team are great. You can't have a whole team of that, but the people who are just savants when it comes to creative. And it's they don't really even understand the business problem, but they just see connections in anything they read. Those are great, but you need some core group of people who are no, I really understand what Farmers Insurance delivers. I understand the difference between a good quarter and a bad quarter. And I understand why this product might be actually really interesting and helpful. And
that's I think where you're a good client and your strategist and your account people also. I mean, I'm a huge believer in a solid brief. And and working to a brief. So if you give creatives just free reign, you're probably not going to get work you need or want.
Exactly.
But if you give good, lane lines, even the ones who don't necessarily understand your business, at least have like, okay, these are the things this is my playground. These are the lanes I need to mostly stay within.
Yes.
But I do think your best creatives, or at least your best creative leadership, is going to people who get the business.
100%.
They have to.
At that level, you definitely have to. I think you have to actually want to know the business at that level, because otherwise you'll just be a miserable creative director, because you'll be having to kind of like drag yourself into that, as opposed to coming with curiosity about like, what is going on this quarter? What is the weird thing that happened in the background that we have no idea about typically? Like, I want to know, because that's what's on your mind. And I think the creative brief is another, again, you could have a whole podcast on it, and there's guys they call themselves the Brief Bros. And I was on their podcast a while back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
To a creative and a strategist. And they dig deep into briefs, and they are worth checking out, because they're actually creating now a repository of great creative briefs, so that people can really start to understand what is a great creative brief, because 98% of them are not. And they're often undervalued, I think, also in agencies. Sometimes the agency undervalues it, sometimes the client does. But to me, I always said it's the most important document that we have, because none of this works.
Well, at the end of the day, I want a conversation to be about the subjective side of the work, not the objective. So if I've written a brief and the creative is off brief, we're having a shit conversation.
You're not even near the finish.
Now we're not talking about the right things. There are going to be opinions on whether I like this or not, but whether or not it is solving the right problem shouldn't be the conversation. So that gets back to a good brief and following a brief.
What do you think would, if there's maybe one thing that shows up for you that would make agencies better partners to a client?
I think it's going to vary by agency, and maybe I'm going to be repetitive, but it is caring about the business. Understanding my business enough to get it, to care, and not looking at it as, can I win an award, but rather, can I do great work that will solve the client's problem? And I think the great work that solves the client's problem will automatically be kind of award winning in the right settings, right? So that's, that for me is probably one of the biggest things that an agency can do, is, just be engaged in like getting what's going on.
I think it's a remarkable thing to see how often that doesn't happen. Like, I've been in agencies where that does, but I've also been where it's just like, some folks, it's, it's the awards, that conversation happens, it's real. And then some folks, it's just do good work, but not understand the business to do good work. So that piece gets missing, and you're just expecting the brief to hold all of that information. Whereas a really good brief is supported by that ongoing conversation around understanding the business. So when it shows up, it's like, this makes perfect sense for where you guys are right now. So of course we want to solve this problem, You've worked on the agency side, so I'm curious your thoughts on what could make clients better partners to an agency.
I think that's transparency about the business. Not treating your creatives like they're children, and not treating your agency like they're a vendor, or like they're children who don't understand, or like, I don't trust you with my information. I think the more you can kind of bring people together, share the critical information, and have real conversations, the better the relationship's going to be. And giving good direction.
The word trust has shown up a few times, and I feel like that's, that hits to me. Like, I feel like almost every bad relationship with a client is that trust just isn't there. And it's not to blame either side, because there's probably plenty of blame to go around from both sides. It's the
always
be curious about the business and be transparent and be open and allow that conversation to happen. I think if you just start there, you're probably 80% of the way there. If you just come with those mindsets of curiosity and mutual respect, that everybody is capable, can handle the truth. And then that sets you up for those harder conversations, because now it's like we're all speaking the same language, And then
Right.
if something goes wrong, it's like, we've talked about this being really important to us. So therefore, when this didn't happen the way it should have, it's frustrating. How do we deal with that? Versus sometimes I think when you don't have that transparency, it's like, we're really pissed about this thing. And as an agency, you're kind of like, well, where the hell did that come from? I didn't even know that was on their radar. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like you're flying blind a little bit. And then as a client, yeah, you're sitting there maybe holding it close to the vest because you don't trust that the agency knows what to do with that information,
Yeah. It's funny. You're just somehow brought me back to one of my first agency job. I was straight out of college.
Yeah.
Little or whatever. And it was, I'm going to date myself so much if I'm not careful, but we're presenting print concepts on tissue and live, and we're going through the concepts, and the client, who will absolutely remain nameless, looks at a concept, grabs the tissue, crumples it up, throws it in the corner and says, yuck. And when you talk about like a way to not build a relationship, camaraderie, trust, to this day, I have no idea why they didn't like that concept. And I had creatives in the room with me, and I'm like, oh God, I hope that didn't kill that poor creative guy, gal. But that was just such a how not to manage your agency, and not to make your agency want to work for you. It's like, if that's how you're going to treat, or the creative concepts are our children basically, and you just like literally crumpled the tissue and across the room.
That's crazy.
That was a challenging client.
Oh God, yeah. And the sad thing is I think that mentality, I'm sure it still exists somewhere, but it used to be baked in a little more, not even just on the client side, but like you go to the ACD and you kind of expect them to do something similar, whether it's just shove your stuff off the table or, tell you to yell at you to get out of here with this garbage. Like that used to be the dynamic. And for some reason, maybe some people were motivated by that, but I think if you want to motivate a broader swath of people, that is probably not the best technique. And I think we're hopefully figuring out better ways to do it.
Right.
One thing I want to jump on, because it's become such a big topic in recent, last couple of years, is AI. What do you see in AI? Like what gets you most excited about it, and maybe what has you most sort of anxious about it?
It's interesting timing that you ask. I'm in the midst of an immersive AI course for senior marketers, and I'm loving it because it is opening up my eyes on stuff that in some ways I had been maybe a little more closed-minded, and I think I'm now much more open. I think the idea, and we talk about this in the class quite a bit, is that it should help you automate the stuff you don't like doing and simplify the stuff you do, or augment the stuff that you do. So automate what you don't like, augment what you do. I think, who knows where we're going to land with it. I do still think like the true human interaction and human touch is never going to be in a computer. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and the computer is going to come back and be mad at me in 10 years for saying that.
Exactly.
But I do think that, you can use it for jumping off points. You can use it to trigger thoughts. You can use it to help you ask questions that you might not think about. Just as a use case in this class I'm taking, they fed the current persona of a brand into it and said, how might you expand on this persona? And the AI came back with a persona that no one had thought of. It was like, that's a really interesting persona that they got from imagery, not even from words, just kind of from imagery that had been used for a successful brand. So I think, it is great for helping us like advance. It's slightly terrifying, right? And there are, I think we're unrealistic if we're saying that jobs aren't going to be impacted. One of the, again, back to my class, one of the things they put up on the screen was, here are the jobs that we had in the early 2000s and that we have now. There are no longer whole swaths of jobs because of digital marketing. It has, there is, a lot of the old traditional, you remember spray mounting ads and putting them on tape? We don't do that anymore, right? There's and that's not a huge career ender to not have to,
No,
but things have
but it was a
changed,
part of
right?
somebody's job,
Right. And,
Yeah.
things have changed. They're going to keep changing.
Mm-hmm.
And AI is probably, this is such a cliched quote, it's not going to take our jobs. It's going to take AI, people who know how to use AI are going to take the jobs.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
It's here. And we
Yeah.
need to figure out how to embrace it, how to use it for the right things. I mean, the power of the research, the power of its ability to analyze data, and it's only getting better. So the people who tried it 6 months ago and said, oh, it hallucinated on this, like try it again, you might find a completely different answer.
Yeah.
It's terrifying and exciting. And, I think it's just important to stay on the forefront of it. If you want to continue to succeed in this industry, you've got to understand what it's being used for, how it can be used, and how you can harness it to the best of your abilities.
I think so. I mean, I don't think you can put your head in the sand. I think that is immediate doom for your career. And your career might be doomed in the sense that the way you thought it was going to look a few years ago, it's not going to look like that. But how do we get as many people engaged with it so that as we start to redefine what our careers look like, people with the more, forward-looking, hopefully a little optimistic, curious types are the ones who are going, ooh, this could be how we use it, rather than just leaving it in the hands of people who might have, less positive means, ends in mind. So I think you got to play with it. You got to learn. It is scary,
but the other thing,
changing.
it won't replace this, right? I mean, you and I are virtual, but it doesn't replace, I've heard stories of people like running it on the side and having it answering questions while they're in a meeting, but you're not going to be able to actually have a meeting and have a conversation and, until it's embedded in our heads and feeding us, news, the ability to think on your feet and to talk and interact and to have an emotional connection, that's not going to get replaced. And that's a huge part of all of our jobs. And
it is,
I mean, even in the most kind of wonky data role, you still have to have some means of kind of interacting with another human being with humanity. And I think that's the part that maybe keeps me from being scared. It makes me more optimistic and excited.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same place. I think the humanity question is the interesting one for us all to just hold on to and kind of think, okay, how can we maintain and even expand the beauty and power of humanity, not just in work, but just across our existence as we go deeper into this. And I think the good news is I think most people want that. So therefore, that's going to be present as we continue to explore it. And I think there is something, to your point, just irreplaceable about it at its most foundational level, that even if you can perfectly mimic it, like we're somehow tuned to recognize that it's not exactly the same thing. And that's something I'm at least holding on to.
Right.
That gives me hope too.
The pushback on the Google AI ad writing the letter for the little girl at the Olympics to Sydney. That I think shows that we aren't ready to give up the humanity. I mean, obviously people aren't ready for a lot of it, but there was the pushback there was on the humanity. I don't think it was on the skill set. If that ad had been shifted to say, I want to be just like Sydney McLaughlin, I hope I didn't mess up her last name, help me build workouts that mimic her training, we would have all gone, awesome use.
That's cool.
That's a great way to use it for your 7-year-old. Teach her how to dig that stuff up. But to say hey, send a letter to my idol for me, or write it for me, or help me. That was the whole point was that
you're replacing the wrong
one-to-one
thing. Like you said, we want to replace the stuff we don't want to do, and we want to augment the stuff we do want to do. So it feels like, that missed the mark there. I want to kind of bring it back to this whole idea of work and desuckifying work. And, for you, and you may not have this answer, but I'm just going to put it out there, just curious. If you were sort of designing the most perfect job for yourself, what would it look like? What would your experience be like?
I think there's a lot of things that would go into that. It's mutual respect. It's the ability to do work that matters, which is always for me one of the most important things. It's doing work that matters within the organization and ideally into the broader world. So some purpose, of some sort, even if it's just making people's lives safer or happier or easier. I mean, every brand I think has the ability to do that in some way. Yeah, I mean, I think it's trust in relationships. I mean, that's the one thing I'm really looking for. I am looking for my next like a long-term gig. And as much as I love the fractional work, what I want from that next big role is the relationships. And that's the most important thing as I'm being very, very choiceful in what's next. It's going to be much more about the people and how I interact with them and what my ability to impact the business is than what the actual title, salary, company is going to be.
Yeah, I think that relationship, the idea of connection, I think it's where a lot of people are sitting right now. It's just like in the midst of everything that's changing and weird in the world and technology and all that, it's like ultimately that's our core need, right. and if we can find a place to work where that need is fulfilled, I mean, that's pretty awesome. So I certainly believe you will find that. I feel pretty confident in that. So, the question is, what does it look like? And hopefully we'll find that out soon.
Right.
One other thing I've been doing lately is giving our guests a chance to ask the next guest a question. So my next guest is a woman named Katie McDonald, and she does some interesting work. She describes herself as a lifestyle coach and a self-care strategist, really kind of helping people, in many ways, sort of live the best way possible in the midst of all of what we've been talking about, sort of the crazy chaoticness of our lives, to find a way to make that life work for you and really take care of yourself and your soul. Do you have any question that I can pass along to her?
Yeah, I think I would be interested in how much onus she puts on us as individuals versus the people we interact with for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that she's going to say it's on us because how we absorb things is what matters. But I am curious, what her thinking is, because I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, and just the other day I was talking to a woman who is in a newer role. She hates her job, she hates her job, and I don't know how she can fix that because she is dealing with people that are just not treating her well.
Yeah.
What's the line on that, and how do you manage those sorts of settings? I'd be just kind of curious from somebody who does this professionally, as opposed to me just saying, "Gosh, I'm sorry, that sounds awful."
That's terrible. I don't know what to do. Yeah, right. I'm very curious too, because that is always that challenge of how much we obviously ultimately own the choices that we make, but how do you get to those choices? If somebody ultimately decides to leave a job that they hate, what is the process of getting there? Meaning, some people might have that gut reaction, like, I got to run.
Right.
And other people might be like, I'm going to give myself every chance to make it work. And my hunch is it's somewhere in between for each person. But I bet you Katie has a really good, robust answer to that will be much more satisfying than our speculation could be.
Right.
Yeah. So I will definitely awesome. Pass that along. Yeah, for sure.
Great.
So as we're starting to wrap up, another thing I always want to kind of know from people, if you could wave a magic wand and kind of just make the work world fully desuckified, just awesome every day, what does that look like?
I am going to push back and say you can't.
Okay.
And I think that it would be a disservice to us as humans to want that. I think, maybe it's a Pollyanna, but you don't appreciate the sunshine until after it's rained, whatever. You need the highs and lows. That's part of being human and the emotional kind of range. So, and we don't call it play, we call it work.
Right.
Sometimes it's going to suck, and sometimes it's going to be hard, and some days you're going to do stuff you don't like doing or that's boring. And what I would want for myself and for others that looking for their next role or their in roles is for the pendulum to be more towards I love what I do, or I love what I do despite the fact that some things aren't great. So I
like that.
It's going to suck. You're in a relationship, you have a spouse or a partner, there are days it's not great, but you love them, and you love them more of the time than you don't, or you ideally leave. I think it's, there's some similarities. You can't have, expecting things to be sunshine and roses every single day is an unrealistic expectation.
I agree. And I actually, in an interesting way, I think by pushing back and sort of answering differently, you created an interesting answer, right? Which is like, an ideal world is one where we have the ups and downs, but we're somehow anchored in some broader connection to the work that we're doing. And maybe underneath all of that, there is the ability and the resilience to navigate whatever comes in that space.
I think if it's hard, it's, anything worth doing is going to be hard. Sometimes getting through big challenges is the most satisfying thing you can do. Yeah. And solving problems. I think that's, as the more senior you are in your job, I think it's something that we sometimes forget in more senior levels. Your job is to deal with the bad stuff.
Yes.
So that the more like junior folks can just
clear the runway.
Right. Yeah. My job is to like block and tackle and get the nasty stuff out of the way. So if I want every day to be desuckified, I need to go back to, using crayons on the kitchen table or something. I don't know.
Which, sounds fun for about an hour.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's like, there is actually, it's weird. As you described the blocking and tackling, I was like, well, that is kind of fun though. Like, when it's the kinds of problems that you get excited about, even though like they suck. And so you're not taking the suck out, but the ability to tackle them and have some amount of success at clearing them out of the way. Right. I think for most of us, when you get to a certain level, like that is actually fun, as weird as it sounds, like getting stuff thrown at you and then going, how do I show up so that I can handle this and make life better for the people who work for me? Like there's joy in that, even though in the moment, you might be fuming or making sarcastic comments or bitching to your coworker. It doesn't mean that at some level you're not getting something out of it, Yeah. Well, one of the last things I always like to ask is a little more light and playful. If you listen to my show at all, you'll hear some sound effects, mostly cats, because I'm a cat person, but I'd mix in some others. And so far, most of the guests have also contributed their own sound effect into the mix, which can be anything. So are you up for throwing a desuckified sound into the mix?
I have one that's probably going to be more of like an inside joke with you and me and some of our crew from an ad that we did.
Okay.
It was a fantastic ad campaign. And the complaint we got the most often was from one character in the ad campaign going, ugh. And I got hate mail for that, ugh, from so many people. So you're getting that as a sound effect, just as a tribute to you and the ads we did together.
That is so funny to me. It's funny to me, like what people grab onto, like that they then will write letters about for in an ad, because like, I remember that moment vividly in the spot. And I remember thinking like, well, that's a nice visceral human reaction, right? Like that's how you feel about getting your phone bill. Like, and it's funny that, several people put pen to paper or hand to computer and said, I don't like that. But yeah, I may have to include, if I can dig up a link to that ad.
I have it somewhere.
Yeah, I'll have to link out to that so people can find out if they also have a visceral hatred towards that poor woman's natural expression. Right.
I mean, she was a real customer. Like,
she was great.
A real reaction.
They were all great. Everybody had really nice, good reactions. But that's funny to me, and we can hopefully bring people in on the joke a little by sharing the spot.
Perfect.
Well, before we go, what is the best way for people to find you if they want to connect with you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always the best. Just my name. So.
Yeah. Well, I will be sure to link out to that in the show notes as well to make it super easy for people. Well, Leesa, great. I appreciate you coming on the show. This was a really fun discussion and got some
this was great.
Good inside nuggets on life on the client side that opened my eyes a little bit. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Leesa for bringing passion, intelligence, and a strong POV to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider going back in time to put a few dozen DesuckifyWork product placements into the movie Office Space. That logo would look awfully nice on a big old swingline stapler. You can follow Leesa on LinkedIn. She shares a lot of great insights that make you think more deeply about the work of advertising and marketing. Speaking of thinking, you should think about checking out my site and my Substack newsletter. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour strategy session. Bye, everyone.